Welcome to Smarter Cities with me, Jason D'Souza. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation, known as the ABC, is Australia's public national broadcaster. It holds a consistent place in recording the evolution of Australia as a nation. But perhaps at its heart is its focus on high-quality children's programming, which consistently displays excellence in Australian creative talent and projects the best of our nation internationally. One might say the ABC's children's programming is a gift, certainly to all parents. It is for this reason I am delighted to welcome my guest today, Libbie Doherty, Head of Children's Content at the ABC, to the podcast. How does children's television content contribute to the education and development of our children? And what role does Australian children's content play in projecting Australia's values and place in the world? Well, Libbie Doherty joins me now to delve into these questions. Welcome to Smarter Cities.
Thanks, Jason, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It was great to have you here. I've been quite excited about this because I am a victim of children's programming on a regular basis, and so I seem to know quite a little bit about this. So I'm really curious about how you do all the things you do and how you manage to entertain so many children. And first of all, can I just say, as a parent, thank you for everything ABC Kids does. It's just wonderful content. Congratulations to everything that you do and all your team. So that's a nice segue, actually. How on earth do you get to be head of children's content at the ABC? How do you find yourself in that position?
It's a great question. I ask myself that every day, how I somehow managed to be the imposter sitting in the seat. But
we all feel a little bit like that.
I think everyone can empathise with that. No, but seriously, I've been working in the children's business for probably the best on 25 years. I started my career as a producer, making content, sitting on the other side of the fence, creating shows, working with companies in Australia and overseas that made children's content. A job came up at the ABC, and I thought, you know what, I haven't got my own company. I'm sort of a gun for hire, threw my hat in the ring, and was very fortunate to sort of have that, career-defining moment where I swapped the fences and joined the network and learnt.
So you started on the commercial network side?
Just making content. Making television programs.
Okay.
So then I, sort of flipped into commissioning television programs, which is a very different discipline. You go from, like, when you're running a show and making a program, you, as a producer, hold the core idea of the program. So every department, the directors, the writers, the camera, everyone is working towards this sort of core idea of the show and the vision that sits within the show. So all of a sudden I was then sitting on the other side of the fence where I was running up to 15 shows.
Wow.
And juggling, the creative on all of those 15 shows with the producers, of course, who are really driving things. But I really had to retrain my brain to manage the kind of amount of material and approach the content in a different manner. I worked as commissioning editor for 3 years and then was very fortunate to take position as head of the department about 5 years ago.
Were you intimidated by that? Moving to the sort of head of children's content for an entire national broadcaster? Like, that seems to me intimidating.
Yeah, yes. It's definitely intimidating, but funnily enough, I saw Obama speak this week, and
he's been here, right?
He talked
His
about...
His motorcade drove past me the other day. I was at the Opera House, and there it all went, and I thought, wow. Okay.
Yeah, he's astounding. But he talked about, in all of these leadership positions, you're running a marathon, and you get past the baton, you run with it for a while, and then you pass the baton to the next person. And I actually just thought that was an incredible metaphor for the job I have at ABC Children's. I inherited a 50-year legacy of incredible children's content. It's now my job to take that legacy and do my sprint in the marathon, and then I will pass that on to the next person. So it's an incredible privilege, it's an incredible honour to look after the cultural screen and audio content for Australia's children. It's in our charter, so my job is to service every Australian child. There's 4.4 million of them between the ages of 2 and 18. So we take that role very seriously. Obviously, I've got an incredible team who brings ideas to me. We also work with the external sector, producers on the outside of the ABC who bring ideas like Bluey to us, and then we work with them to make those shows and to finance them with the international market. So that's sort of the job in a nutshell, and it's a wonderful, I guess, creative endeavour to work across content that is animation, live action, comedy, preschool, digital. You know, there's not a lot of television genres that sort of have the mix that we have. A lot of people in television either work in sort of straight up comedy, straight up drama, factual documentary. So they might have their entire career just working in a discipline, whereas in children's we're sort of a multidisciplinary environment, which is hugely exciting and means that the job is always changing, always different.
It's interesting. I didn't think of the diversity of age groups so much as well, because I'm still in the young child phase. But of course, you know, what you just said was, you know, up to 18. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a really difficult challenge in a way, isn't it? Because children change so much in those age groups between, you know, young child to middle child to sort of almost adult child. I mean, that must be a challenge in itself.
Yeah, it's really important to keep an eye on the prize, because childhood is a spectrum, and so each show we make, we think very carefully about at what stage of development is where's the sweet spot, I guess, for this show. But often, you know, we know that kids are also very, they are not linear. So a 5-year-old for one family is very different to a 5-year-old in another family. So whenever we make a show, we kind of know there's a stretch on either side of it that children will engage with the content when they're ready. And that's what I think is really amazing. All the testing we've ever done with children, when we've put content in front of them, and I know parents have worries about content, we have worries about content. But what I always find really reinforcing is that when children are asked to look at something, they'll make their own decision. Their fingers will hover over like a show, and you can see them going, "Oh, I'm not quite ready for that. I'm going to go to this sort of cartoon over here that I still feel safe about." So it's
well, my kids say that all the time. You know, I like that, but I don't like it because I was scared of this part. And you know, I'm trying to think of one of them, the one with the fish, Nemo.
Yep.
They loved that film except for the scene where the mother dies, right? Because of course nobody wants to see that sort of thing. But if you don't have that, then how do you have a story? Like you have some form of defining moment that defines Nemo, right?
Yeah, and it's so it's really great that we listen to kids now and hear what they've got to say about it, because I think in the past, you know, when I first joined the children's production industry, you know, it was sort of like adults telling kids what to do or what kids would like or what kids would think. And I think our content has become a lot more sophisticated in that we really try to make shows that are from the child's point of view. And I know that sounds dead obvious, but it's a real art form to write something that an 8-year-old would think is sort of bang on for them. So I've got an amazing team of people who that is basically their
to allow them
master
to think
skill.
like a child.
Yeah,
that's a good segue into the creative process. And I want to get to it, but you know, and certainly I grew up in Hong Kong, and we had 2 English language channels, TVB and ATV, and they had, you know, actually quite visionary at the time. They had certain cultural hours. So you had the Australian hour, you had the Japanese hour, you had the whatever, right? For some reason, the Japanese hour was on the English language channel. I'm not sure why, but anyway, it was. And sometimes it was dubbed and sometimes it was subtitled. So there was a lot of Australian television that came through that process. So I learned a little bit about, you know, like there was, I think it was Skippy. Is it Skippy? Yeah, the kangaroo.
Yep.
Which of course was completely foreign to us as the idea of a kangaroo. And of course, I always think, you know, friends of mine come here. We're looking forward. We've come to Sydney. We're really looking forward to seeing kangaroos. Like, the idea of wild kangaroos in Sydney streets is sort of amusing to us, right? But anyway, that's an aside. But let me ask this: why are children's channels needed? Why do we need this at all? Like, can't we just combine children's programming onto a regular channel?
We can, and some people do. So Netflix, for example, you know, the children's content just sits within the general content.
But it's on the kids'
It's on the
profile,
kids tab.
right?
So, yeah, so there are ways that you can kind of consolidate everything into a central space. But I think the question really is, why do we make children's content at all?
Yes.
Because
why do we need it?
Why do we care? And we care a lot because, as we all know, it's about our identity. You know, watching content from the age of 2 or the age of 3 or whenever you start on play school or however your parents allow you to enter into this realm, from the first moments you are forming your sense of self and your sense of your place within the culture that you live. And so screen content in particular has a very specific role in that evolution of a child's perception of who they are and how, you know, where they fit in this big world as they develop through childhood. Obviously, having content that then mirrors that experience as they age. So, as I sort of said before, trying to make content that's age appropriate. So, you know, as you walk through your life, you know, when you're 3, watching content that's talking to you as a 3-year-old, talking to you as an 8-year-old, etc. So you can come out of, you know, teenagehood as best you can with the best sense of yourself and the culture that you live in and what it's like and where you fit. So I think there's that cultural piece that's very difficult to quantify in a money term, but why we exist and why I believe the government feels it's important that the ABC is a publicly funded organisation. The children's component of the ABC is a critical part of our charter. So it is legislated that we have to have children's content for exactly this reason.
It's legislated, really?
Yeah.
I didn't realise that.
So it's in the legislation. So there's an X number of hours that, you know, we need to have Australian content. So I mean, it's not only about children's content; it's actually about Australian content as well. It's making sure that we have a sense of ourselves and our culture and who we are as people in the screen content that we all make. And obviously without regulation, it would just be a lot easier to buy American content and fill the hours and hours of TV that we need to do, or UK content, because the costs of production are really expensive. So it's not cheap and it's not easy, but it's an essential part of who we are. And obviously, as time has gone on, we also have to better reflect, you know, contemporary Australia and who we are as people and what values we have as a society. So Skippy's like a hilarious example because like you couldn't make it now for kids.
Completely foreign to me.
There's so many bad things that happen in Skippy. People are smoking, like the adults in the show are smoking. The poor old kangaroos that were cast in the show, and there were various ones of them, you know, were doing dangerous things. You know, again, it's an evolutionary process. It's always funny when you look back on children's content because things were so much naughtier in the 80s when I was growing up.
Well, that's right. It was, remember the Bluey episode of It Was the 80s?
And it was a wild place.
Absolutely hilarious to watch, right?
Yeah, and it speaks to us.
It does, yeah.
Because,
as parents, you kind of go, yeah, okay, I get that.
Yeah, it's really funny. But yeah, I'm more convinced than ever that we want our children to speak in our accents. We want them to have a connection to their place and where they live. But we also want them to feel connected to the global community. And YouTube and platforms like social media platforms have opened that up in a way that was not in our childhood, for example.
Absolutely.
So I'm really thankful to those platforms for, I guess, opening up Australia to the rest of the world, because when we used to pitch Australian kids content 10, even 5 years ago, often we would ask, could you change the accent? Can we dub it in another language? Can we dub it in American English or British English? But I think the proliferation of sort of the global content, you know, boom that we're in, and platforms like YouTube, where kids from all over the world are listening to each other all the time, those sorts of, I guess, unnecessary changes to content have kind of gone away, and actually embracing who we are as Australians is a massive selling point.
I totally agree.
You know.
I mean, I'm really thankful we have a public broadcaster that is it's sort of a record of the evolution of the country over time, because I think, you know, we are still a young nation in modern era, in its modern form, right? We're an old nation in terms of our history, but we're a newer nation in terms of our modern era. And we're still, I think, you know, I'm a migrant to the country, so I'm sort of only 20 odd years in, and my children will grow up in the country, and I married an Australian. But I think as a country, we're still sort of working out exactly who we want to be and why we want to be. And I don't think that's ever a process that ever really completes. You know, it's a constant evolution. And so without the ABC and its channels sort of recording that, I think it's difficult for us to learn from our past, right? And can we talk about Bluey for a second?
Yeah.
I think we should go into that, because I think, you know, it, first of all, absolutely wonderful show. And when we started watching it with our two daughters before my son was born, I honestly felt in parts, they were the same age as the two characters, Bluey and Bingo, that there was a camera in our house and that we were seeing some of these things, like how on earth, surely not, right? But then the thing I really love about it as well is that it is a reflection of a strong family unit in an Australian setting in Brisbane. There is Australian humour in it, you know, the concept of the bush we, for example, which I always find amusing. And, you know, the difficulties of being a family with young children are sort of reflected in a humorous way. And I must say I'm always insecure as a father watching Bandit, who seems to be the world's most perfect father in the way he's always with his kids. In fact, there's this one wonderful episode where the Bingo says to her father, you know, why are you going away for work for 3 weeks? You know, you're always at work. And he turns around and he says, I'm never at work. I'm like, okay, I wish that was true for me too. Anyway, so what is it about Bluey that captures both parents' and children's imaginations?
So Bluey is a gift in anyone's career. I mean, I am so thankful to the creator, writer, director and showrunner Joe Brumm, who is the genius behind Bluey. So most people might not know that the show is made by an independent production company called Ludo. So the ABC licenses the show and we supported them in the early stages of the development of the show. But the genius idea came from them. So it's wonderful in my job to have, you know, shows like this that sort of land in your lap, and it's sort of then beholden on us to like get behind the team and make it happen. So we're so lucky that, you know, Joe brought the project to us. This is a very authored show, so exactly what you're speaking to, Joe has, when he started writing the show, his girls were sort of the same age, and one of the other producers at Ludo Studios. So it was very much an authored piece of work around, you know, the ups and downs of being parents and also the ups and downs of being kids. But what was so different about it versus other preschool content in the market like Peppa Pig, etc., in those shows, the parents were often a little bit secondary or a bit stupid or a bit silly or kind of a hyper cartoon version of parents.
Although my kids tell me I have a good affinity with Daddy Pig. But
possibly.
Yes. I thought that was offensive.
Yeah, but you wouldn't probably sit down and watch Peppa, whereas what we know is that really, and Joe I think always sums it up really well, is he says that it's a sitcom that preschoolers want to watch.
Yes.
Whereas often you have a sitcom that's just like goes over the head of preschool. So it's very much, you know, I guess in the creation of the show, that's where he's coming from, and he does want it to play to both audiences equally, that adults are getting out of it as much as the kids are getting out of it, which he has successfully done.
Absolutely.
Completely.
Absolutely successfully done it. I mean,
yeah.
There's so many episodes that sort of call to you as a parent. There's one where Bingo has a dream, and at the end of the dream, she finds herself, you know, finds herself back in her mother's arms, and my wife just thought this was tugging at the heartstrings. Or another one where Bluey makes a video for her sister who was in hospital, right? And she goes through all this effort to find a way to get her sister to feel better. Something to do with underpants, I think, if I remember correctly. And again, at the end, you just feel, wow, that's just, it is the authors have done just this remarkable job of capturing life as a parent, as a young family. I think A Gift is excellent. I think one thing I really love about it, though, other than the sort of content of it, is the fact that it does portray Australia in an Australian way, which is so difficult to do, I think, when there's so much content around. And I remember when we had coffee some time ago, and you'd just come back from New York, and you'd just seen a parade, and I think you were sort of Madison Avenue or something like that, right? And there was Bluey being displayed. You were out there promoting it. How'd that feel to see, Australian product like that?
Yeah, it was last Thanksgiving in New York, and it was absolutely emotional, I have to say. I think I told you. We had three things going on. We had the Bluey theatre production opening at Madison Square Garden, which was like exciting in itself. Bluey in the Macy's Parade, so the balloon was in the Macy's Parade, which is a very seminal event for any American. It's like their Thanksgiving, they sit down, they watch the Macy's Parade, then they watch a football game. So like more eyeballs on this parade than anything else. And then because of that, we all went over, the makers, the cast, and then Bluey ended up being on Jimmy Fallon as well that week. So it was like, it was the most extraordinary, I guess, event to be at. But what really sort of broke my heart open, I think, was sitting in Madison Square Garden with 5,000 American families and their kids, and hearing the opening of that theatre production, which has all of these beautiful Australian bird sounds. It's like bird song opens the theatre production, and these puppets, birds fly across the stage. And to hear, like, kids around me talking about bushwees and using Australian sort of language in American accent, and then this beautiful Australian soundscape, I literally burst into tears because it was just such an incredible moment to go, wow, this is Australian culture at its best. That thing we spoke about at the very beginning of this podcast, which is about your identity. I'm sitting there as an Australian in the world's biggest city, feeling so at home, because our culture is just sitting here at home in the world's biggest culture, for example. It's it was just really profound.
What a remarkable story. And
yeah.
I mean, I'll draw a sort of experience we had recently where we had a former Secretary of Navy come and visit us here at Lend-Lease, and my boss, Dale Connor, and I had a lunch with him in a bigger group. And he was obviously talking about a very different topic. He was talking about our increasing defence relationship between America and Australia and others, and the AUKUS Pact and the industrial development that Australia will need to do to support our new defence capability. But one of the comments he made I found really interesting. He said, Australian accents are welcome in America. So whenever you turn up in Congress and you have your Australian accent, congressmen and women say, what do you need? Right? And so there is now this appreciation, I think, amongst our allies and partners and friends of the fact that actually, as Australians, we have a lot to offer. We are good allies, we are good friends, we are good partners, we can help you develop. And I think here, what we do at Lend-Lease is really all about that. We go and develop large precincts, new parts of cities. We help create places where people can actually grow and prosper. Right? That's certainly how we'd like to think of ourselves. And so it was really interesting to sort of hear that comment, right? And one of the best bits of that Bluey story that you told me I love is the fact that they didn't dub the accent into an American, it didn't make it into an American show. Why didn't they do that?
We have to be really thankful when you're working with the international market. It's really advantageous when there's an Australian on the other side of the country. Yeah. So Disney Global are our partners, as well as BBC Studios. BBC Studios distribute the show, so they brokered the deal with Disney for after the first season was made. And Disney came on, super quick. Jane Gould is the genius in Disney US, who is a Brisbane girl who totally saw the show and got it. And so, it's very interesting how sometimes these things are all about timing as well. But Jane put it into research, which is how Disney always acquire shows. They, test them with children first to make sure that it's going to work on their platforms. And the research came back overwhelmingly that, accents are great, keep it as is. But, maybe 20 years ago, they would have dubbed it, and it just would have been a different show, because they probably then would have changed some of the Australianisms.
The humour would have been lost.
And it's just the timing and the whole texture of the voices would have been such a shame. So I think, but I do think that, as well as I said earlier, I think that's this sort of change in the whole global landscape as well, that accents from all different places are okay.
Are welcome and accepted.
Actually welcome. And we talk a lot about it on our channel as well. Like, whilst the Australian accent's important here, also having other language on our channel is really important. So we have quite a commitment to First Nations language. So you may notice at the beginning of the day we have an acknowledgement of country on the channel.
Yes.
We often have content that's in different First Nations language, depending on where we've shot it or what the content is related to. We also are starting to have episodes of Bluey, like in Mandarin.
Oh, really?
Available on iViews, so people can also listen in their second language or their first language.
And they'll still appreciate the humour, I think. Even if they read subtitles, I think you can come
Absolutely,
through, right?
And it's really fun listening to Bluey in Mandarin if you've watched it in English, because then you get another, you get another bite of the cherry on it. So we also know that kids, for some reason, I'm not sure why they do this, but we know that older kids also watch a lot of television with the subtitles on.
Oh, really?
They're watching English language content with English subtitles on.
I wonder if that's YouTube.
I think it's just the multi-screening and the multitasking, behaviours that they do. So we are very open, which we wouldn't have been 10 years ago, to having content that's bilingual or multilingual, because we also know that's the way that Australian families operate. Many kids speak English at school, come home and speak 2 languages at home, or sometimes 3. So
absolutely.
We want to bring that into our content sort of going forward.
I had a meeting with a bunch of our graduate group last week. It was a coffee catch-up, which was odd because it was at 5 o'clock and we didn't drink coffee at that point. But anyway, the fascinating stories these young people were saying, that their parents had come to Australia from, a lot of people from Hong Kong, actually, from my home city, and had started here, had started small businesses, had worked really hard, got them through school, and now they're graduates at Lend-Lease, which is a pretty difficult place to become a graduate at. And I'm not sure I would have got in as a grad, and fortunately I'm here now. But their whole commitment was, as now Australians, they were proud of their cultural background. They speak a different language at home, whatever. And now they want to give back to their parents, to what their parents gave them and the country gave them. And I think a lot of what you're saying is captured in that sort of feeling that people are having. And
absolutely.
Look at us as a country. We have such a high. We are a country of migrants in our modern sense. For some 40% of us now were born overseas or something. Many of us speak other languages, right? So, in fact, that's a nice segue into this question, which I have. So I've noticed, on the children's program, my kids love a lot of the international programming you're putting on. One of our favourites, when they were a bit younger, is Hoopla Doopla, which is this sort of collaboration between mainland Chinese and Australian acrobats, right? And I love it, partially because I just love the cultural difference between it. How do you end up with something like that? How do you come up with a creative concept to say, well, let's get 2 cultures together, and while they may not be able to speak, I understand that some of the Chinese acrobats don't speak English at all, how do they come together and create something special like that?
Yeah, it's something we track quite carefully, which is exactly what, to your point, that for over 40% of families are multiracial. So we need to make sure that we're reflecting that in the content. So when we look at our slate, we make sure that we've got properties such as a Hoopla Doopla.
Or a Lubao Bay is another one.
Lubao Bay is
they love that too.
Beautiful example as well. So it's making sure that we have content on the network that is speaking to all the different experiences. And because I think if you walk into any classroom or you walk onto a sports field, we want our channel to feel to kids like that. That's
there's
the array.
There's even a show in an Indian accent now, I think, on the show.
We've got an older show which your kids might not be ready for yet, which is called The Unlisted, which is about an Australian Indian family who it's basically a massive sort of action adventure series. So yeah, we often
might need to delay that a little bit.
We often think about what families haven't we seen before? How do we represent them? But then the really important thing is making sure that the people who create that content come from those cultural backgrounds. So there's a real authenticity and a specificity to the content that we're making. So we make sure that they're in the writers' rooms, they're where possible in production roles, behind the camera, in the post-production pipeline. So we can make sure that at each step of the way, those voices are represented in the creative content making process, which is really fun and exciting. Because for many years we haven't really had a conversation about diversity and inclusion in the screen sector. 3 years ago, I think, or might have been 4, the ABC we changed our commissioning guidelines, and we acknowledged that we needed to prioritise First Nations people from culturally linguistic diverse backgrounds, people from regional Australia, so there's a geographical inclusion, LGBTQI++ people, and then of course people living with a disability.
So you made a conscious decision as a consequence of a review to do this? Okay.
Yeah, so we published that to the production sector and made it very clear that projects that dealt with any of those sort of areas of priority would be a priority to the ABC, and we sort of had rules around how that would work. We also obviously have a major commitment to women. It's fairly, in the past, a male-dominated industry in some of the roles. Directors, you probably hear the stats after the Oscars, there's like 9% of directors are women, etc. So there's been quite a big industry-wide, initiative around through us, Screen Australia, some of the other networks, getting together and saying, okay, when you bring a project to us, we want to see that there's a 50-50 gender split across all the departments working on production. So it's a process. Things never change overnight, but I guess you've got to put those lines in the sand so that people actually do make change. And I would say 3 years on, we're seeing some really good results already, but
again,
it will
that's
take
reflective
some more
of our
time.
society.
Yeah,
the review is reflecting the change in our
absolutely.
society.
And from our point of view, I mean, the children's audience are the most brutal. You just get one shot at it, and it's probably 10 seconds.
Yeah.
They start on a show, and if they don't like something about it, they're out. Like, they don't even, to get them back is pretty hard, as all parents know.
They're pretty brutal, aren't they?
They're really brutal, and they'll tell you, I love nothing more than talking to kids about what are their favourite shows and what are they watching and why. And
my 7-year-old has learnt the word hypocrite.
There you go.
Dad, you're a hypocrite.
Yeah, sorry, that's probably one of our shows.
Where does his lip come from?
Yeah, but it is that
7-year-old lip.
It is that thing of making sure that again, kids are seeing themselves in that content, and so it's got to be an absolute reflection of contemporary Australia. The problem is keeping up with it. I think it's also a thing about seeing their own experiences in it. I mean, I think one of my children said, "Dad, you've got to watch this episode of Bluey because it's all about the daddy drop-off." Oh yeah.
Right? So I'm like, okay, and sure enough, I think because that's an experience they have, right? Which just on that, I think there's two things I really want to get to before we run out of time, and we will. Play School. We've got to talk about Play School because that has to be one of the great cultural icons of Australia. And it's really launched a lot of Australian talent, isn't it? You know, I mean, my kids loved Teo. He's their favourite. But obviously Justine seems to have done very, very well out of it. And the Play School New Year's Eve event, I still think was one of the best. What is it about Play School that's enduring?
I think Play School's moved beyond into being an icon.
Yes.
You know, it's now the second longest running children's show in the world.
Wow.
So
behind Sesame Street.
No, behind Blue Peter.
Really?
So there's you know, we're very proud of that. It's quite daunting for me to have a show that is such an icon to look after, because again, you're sort of a custodian of it as while I'm here and while we're, and it will long outlast me in the role, no doubt. So we're heading up towards the 65th anniversary. So we're
65th.
So we're working towards, you know, what does Play School look to the next generation, making sure it stays very authentic. But what's really interesting about when you look at the core of Play School is that it's really about imaginary play, and that hasn't changed. That notion of the toys in Play School are basically the avatars, the presenters, because the toys don't speak.
No.
The presenters speak on their behalf. So they're mimicking sort of role, imaginary play to the audience, and
are the kids imagining
with
themselves in those situations?
So the kids, we think, well, what we know is that kids mimic the play. So it's kind of that very early, and it is sort of targeted at 3 to 4 year olds, so very early development. And it's about engaging them in imaginary play and curiosity and using toys and paper mache and toilet rolls, which often end up as funny little characters.
I remember telling you my 9-year-old said, look, I may be 9, but I still love Play School.
Yeah, exactly. And it does have this special place in everyone's heart. And I think when I first went down and met the Play School team, and gosh, the Play School toys are stored in this like incredible cupboard, I again burst into tears because it's such an emotional moment to go, wow, okay, I'm about to hold Big Ted or Jemima
exactly, right.
or
Go,
Humpty,
wow.
you know. And so over the years, and they are the originals, so they're still the main toys. But we've added to them over time, which has been really fun.
So Big Ted is a stunt double?
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes we need to take the toys out of the building. Yeah. So like there are clones. But keeping to that true heart of Play School is what I think has kept it ongoing. And then, of course, yes, the talent, the presenters. We're so fortunate. We have some of Australia's biggest stars working on Play School. It's a really hard gig. Yeah, you've got to be able to sing. You've got to be able to talk to camera without being patronising. You have to be able to play like an idiot, you know, with another adult with a camera on you. It's a really tricky gig, but we're so blessed with the Play School presenters because they're all busy. Job. So we have to work around their schedules as much as we can.
I get the sense it's an in-demand role, though. I think
is.
Many people want to come on and do this.
And there are people who haven't made the cut who I will never reveal. But
it's okay. I'm not auditioning for the role.
The people that do that we are so fortunate to work with. Yeah. I mean, they take it very seriously, but always funny as well. They reflect back to us that, you know, they can be in, you know, a big movie or a big grown-up TV series, but inevitably people will stop them in the street and say, oh my gosh, you're my favourite Play School presenter.
Exactly. You're my favourite Play School presenter.
Which is really, really special. And we feel, again, really blessed that we can sort of still work with people of that calibre. But Play School has also been, very progressive. So, you know, famously, one of the stories, you know, I think it was in the 80s, we showed breastfeeding. I mean, it was like a crime against humanity.
Goodness me.
Yeah, so we've had, you know, same-sex parents in the Windows films, because we still do Through the Windows, you know, everyone will remember that.
The triangle.
So there's, we know that with Play School we have to be reflecting contemporary families in all of the different elements of that as well. And also, I think our presenter lineup, we've had a more diverse group of people than most TV shows, because, you know, we've had had people from all different racial backgrounds on the show for, good 20, 30 years. So that was well ahead of the rest of television, which still, was fairly Anglo-based during that time.
It's interesting, we are getting into that phase where, people are sort of asking, does the makeup of things reflect diversity? And, I think it's a bit... I personally get why we're doing it. Sometimes I find it a bit troubling because I want to be in a position where I actually don't notice any difference. Difference is great. I love difference. Difference makes us better. Difference makes us more successful. Difference makes us think differently. But I'm not sure we want to notice difference. So
I completely agree.
It's one of the things I think we're all struggling with a little bit as we evolve as a country. Let's go a little bit older for a second, which is, and this is contemporary for me because my primary school kids will often come home and ask me some odd question about what happened in Parliament or something. And I'm like, okay, aren't you doing maths and
going
English?
well.
And I said, where did you hear about this? And I heard it on BTN. I'm like, what on earth is BTN, behind the news? So I looked it up, and it's behind the news for kids, right? So is children's content now playing a different role in education with shows like BTN that's challenging kids to think about what traditionally maybe we would have thought about as adult topics?
Well, the great thing about BTN is it's also like an incredibly long-running series, and I may get this wrong, but it's well over 50 years. So it's again a seminal. Like when I was growing up in Australia, BTN was on Mondays at 11 in the morning, and we would sit down as a class and watch it.
And so you watched it in school?
Yeah, so that was with Richard Moorcroft. So there's a real tradition of watching BTN at school. Okay. We know now that it's a bit different because you can download episodes off iView or website, the BTN website, and teachers can. They don't have to do the 11 o'clock appointment to view.
And digital's changed everything. Right?
Which we all, had. So so BTN's always been this very seminal part of, this kids' understanding of the news cycle, which we are so committed to as well, because I think we need kids to understand how to, what's fake news.
Yes.
More than ever, we need kids to have those critical thinking skills around how to unpack a news story, how to unpack the media, how to think about it.
There's so much content now.
There's so much out there. Yeah, they're going to be smarter than us, no doubt, in spotting the holes, as your daughters are already saying when they come home. But BTN is so excellent because what it does very cleverly is it takes really complicated, news, topical news stories and breaks them down into a really manageable way. But we actually know that a number of millennials and other age groups also watch BTN.
Oh, really?
A little bit on the quiet because shamefully they may not know some of the stuff in the news, and BTN just does a really excellent job.
So it's a good summary for young people.
It's really fantastic. I highly recommend, and I learn a lot from BTN. Sometimes I do feel a little bit ashamed that I should know more. But go, okay, well, at least I've picked it up now.
It's probably better than a lot of the
It's a fantastic show, but we also have ABC Education. We do have a whole portal that is a set of teacher resources that can get used in the classroom, because obviously a lot of the content we do could be mapped to the curriculum. But it is an interesting question because sometimes this comes up in my role at the ABC is people will pitch us ideas and it'll be a very educational show, and it's actually not our job. Our job isn't to educate the Australian children, it's to entertain. So it's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. So I'm sort of always responding back, look, we're big E for entertainment, but if we can hide those vegetables in the bolognese as best as possible, that the kids don't know it, then also job done as well. But, the minute we sort of label something educational, if it's not BTN, kids are like, nah.
They'll switch it off.
We don't. That's not what we do. When we're on screen content, it's our downtime, it's our entertainment time, it's our it's our me time, if you like. Yeah. So we sort of run that very careful line.
Interesting concept around kids' downtime. Wow.
Yeah. Well, what in between their very busy scheduled lives where they're going to dance class and soccer and piano, and we know that. I mean, kids are busier than they've ever been.
It's a crowded
It's very crowded.
Life, right?
Yep.
And
yeah.
I think as parents, on Saturday mornings I take my daughters now to gymnastics, and it's an interesting experience because it's me and a whole bunch of mums. Like, gymnastics is my job, so the gymnastics mums and I, and one of the conversations we all have is around this topic, like how do you avoid this situation where you have exhausted kids who've got 97 things to do, all of which are being done with the right intention to make sure they have every opportunity possible, but not exhaust them mentally and physically at the same time. And this is sort of really careful balancing act. And the concept of kids' downtime watching something on television, I think it makes total sense.
Yeah.
I'd never thought of it like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess it's quite, in many ways, a lot of what we do is it is a passive, we want them to have a passive experience. Like, we want them to get so immersed in the storytelling that they're just enjoying it, rather than multi-screening, which they are probably like texting their friends and doing a bunch of other stuff at the same time.
Too much content, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yes. So it is too much, but it's also like I want to know that kids are still reading books as well. So, television contemporary television is, a great new version of books as well, because a lot of the storytelling is really immersive and quite deep for those older kids, where the narrative arcs might run across 10 episodes or 20 episodes. So I think it's, providing those spaces for kids where they can relax and just kick back. But we do know that parents are also concerned about screen time.
Yes, it was one of the things I was going to raise, actually.
Yeah, which is really obvious. Yeah, and I think all the research that's ever been done, there isn't like a perfect number. And I think parents would love that, but I think...
Obviously this is a YouTube show, so we're expecting people to watch it.
Exactly, and we want people to watch it. But it's always about the quality of the content the kids are watching is more the question, and if it fits in with your family life. Yes. So what we also launched 5 years ago, which is a treasure that I think sometimes people don't know about, is ABC Kids Listen. So it was a direct response to, certainly in that preschool space of parents being worried about kids having tablets or phones and just watching too much content. So it's a on-demand DAB radio service. So we have a 24-hour music channel that's got a whole bunch of programs that reflect sort of the toddler's day, as well as a bunch of on-demand podcasts, such as a science podcast called Imagine This. We've got a news time. We've got a First Nations language podcast called Little Yarns, where we explore like a little word each episode on country with a language group, sort of elder and a child. So we've got a bunch of these podcasts, and it's just the most terrific listening experience. It's absolutely beautiful. So there's an app that you need to download, but once you're in, and then kids can navigate it, like we've designed it as well so that it's a safe walled garden environment. You can give it to a 3 or a 5-year-old and they're completely safe.
Certainly that ABC Kids app is amazing, and that is a gift in itself, right? We'll have to end soon, and we can continue for hours because it's so fascinating. But if I was to ask you, you're a custodian of ABC Kids and ABC content, as you said, and if there were 3 things that you wanted, that you needed, that you thought would advance us as a continued beacon of excellence in children's content, what would they be?
So it's a great question. I was really pleased that you asked that question because it actually made me think a bit. But I think the 3 most important things are that Australian parents and families care about Australian kids' content. I know that conceptually they understand it when they're engaging with it, but they really need to get behind it, if you know what I mean, and really embrace it and understand the role it plays. Because if it does go away, if for whatever reason we don't make enough or the ABC can't make enough, our children will be speaking in American accents. They will be speaking in British accents. Like, we will lose our cultural sort of relevance to our children, which I think is a critical issue. It's the thing that keeps me up at night often. But our best chance of making parents love our content is making excellent content. So we really need to invest in our content makers. They're the people like the Joe Brums, the people who come to us with these incredible ideas and make sure that they feel There's a great industry here for them. They don't want to go to America and work over there. They don't want to go to the UK. They want to make Australian content for Australian audiences that travels, because that's really what happens with kids' content. So we need to invest in those people, and that's beholden to the ABC, that's beholden to Screen Australia and a whole bunch of other organisations. So I think it's making sure that the government is supporting, you know, the funding of those people and also the projects, because we are not a big enough market to be sort of self-funded like America. So there's always going to need to be some kind of government support and funding of children's content and children's content makers. Because often as well, people who work in the children's space, often they start their careers often in children's and then graduate up into like a newsreader or Total Control or another, you know, grown-up show. I call them grown-up because adult has another connotation. And so we have a real responsibility to that part of the industry as well. And also the actors, you know, the young child actors who get their first runs on one of our shows, they, you know, can then go on to Hollywood. So we really need to make sure that this ecosystem is really robust and exists for those little people at home who just turn the TV on or look on their phone or are on their tablet. They just need to have the best quality content available to them that's from our culture. So that's our big challenge.
Well,
going forward.
we are. I think all of the country would be behind you on that sentiment. So, Libbie Doherty, thank you so much for being part of Smarter Cities.
Thank you, Jason. It's been excellent.